you're a busy man and in great demand, we start now. So please welcome James Gannon, PharmaLedger, a new era in technology collaboration. Please.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the room. So this probably should be more of a fireside chat than anything else. So I'm going to do some audience participation. Who's heard of PharmaLedger? 1, 2, 3, oh, over half of the room. Okay, great. So I don't need to give this presentation at all then. So let's go back to some of the basics. So I don't actually have an intro slide, so let me do an intro. So my name's James Gannon. I'm VP of Quality, Trust and Safety. So that means that I do everything to do with compliance, be it GXP compliance, data privacy, cybersecurity, and also external trust. So working with our regulators, working with industry bodies, a lot of external engagement is part of my role. So PharmaLedger was formed about, well, it depends on who you ask. It was formed either in January of this year or a little over 3.5 or 4 years ago. PharmaLedger started as an EU-funded research project under the Innovative Medicines Initiative. And anybody that's worked with these IMI or Horizon 2020 programs know fantastic research. Everybody gets together, there's these public-private partnerships, there's millions of euros involved, and people do huge amounts of work, and then nothing ever happens with them. The research is done, the results are published, and they fritter away into nothing. With PharmaLedger, we really didn't want that to happen. So mid last year, we founded a Swiss-based not-for-profit foundation. We're structured as a Swiss Verein. So it's essentially a membership-led organization. We have no profit motive, we're non-commercial, and we are pre-competition. So they're really key things. And why are we here? Why have we made this decision to do this? We notice that when you look across the pharmaceutical value chain in general, there's a lot of problems out there, and they're problems that require more than one company to tackle them. And they're problems that are sufficiently close to the profit motives, particularly of Big Pharma, and as somebody who worked for Big Pharma for 12 years, I can say that. They're sufficiently close to the profit motives that bringing a third party that has a commercial intent, into the mix really doesn't work. We have issues around lack of data governance, visibility, and transparency. This is your classical supply chain issues. Everybody knows that we have challenges around this. Why has no startup or why has no big company like SAP came along and solved this? Because you need that ecosystem-led approach, and nobody is going to hand over all of their precious data to a commercial entity in that space. Systems are not patient-centric. We try to be as much as we can. Most big pharmas have huge patient support organizations, they have patient support leaders, but the technologies that patients increasingly interact with are very rarely designed in a patient-centric manner. Often, patient identities and data are put in place to be monetized. It's a dirty word, but it's a reality. We have to say that. They're either being monetized by startups in, the third-party kind of data collection market, or they're being monetized for internal use, possibly maybe a little bit more ethical use by pharma companies. We want to know data around real-world evidence. We want to know data around patient metrics. Again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that doesn't necessarily scale. Data silos limit, secure and trusted data exchange. Anybody who's worked in pharma for more than maybe 6 months knows that moving data around, particularly between multiple companies, is a nightmare. It is very difficult to do in a secure, trusted, and trustable manner. Counterfeit medicines are a huge issue. This is, I think, a known across the entire industry. We've had a lot of legislative action around this, both in the US and in the EU. Has it been effective? Debatable. Implementing a lot of these fantastic regulatory ideas, again, very debatable how exactly we do that. Increasing risk of cybersecurity attacks and concerns with data privacy. Again, this is another thing we're all very aware of. We've seen the increase in really targeted attacks on the healthcare supply chain in general, and we know that this is a big risk. And intermediaries add cost, time, and complexity. This comes back to that piece that every time you add another service supplier, another technology provider into the mix, you're multiplying the complexity and spend that needs to go into managing that value chain. And really, when you kind of take all those together, It's an incredibly inefficient and incredibly wasteful value chain. So what we saw was an opportunity for a non-commercial player to come into the space, take a lot of the research that we did on a number of use cases that I'll get to later from that IMI research project, and continue that work. Take it out of the research phase and start bringing it into reality, you know? Looking, you know, again, I'll go around, but I'll maybe do it a bit quicker this time, is, you know, how can we bring that multi-stakeholder model of participation to the technology ecosystem? We looked out there and we looked at open source models. If we go to, for example, the financial industry, again, heavily regulated, maybe a little bit less dangerous than pharma from a, you know, a patient impact point of view, they use open source software every day. Anybody here who's worked at a pharma company and has even mentioned trying to use open source software knows how much of a nightmare it is. Every pharma company wants that trusted provider that they can go to and say, I am paying this person to absolve me of liability for use of this piece of software, right? So we adopted that, and we're essentially the front end of a number of open source packages, and we will act as that vendor. Again, we're not making money from this, we're pass-through, but we have our QMS, we have our controls that allow a pharma company, for example, to adopt a piece of open source software that's come through our validation process and give them that benefit of being able to use, you know, what is actually already out there and in widespread use. We are very serious about patient empowerment. You know, we have patient organizations as members of our association. You know, we're not just another industry body that's made up of just pharma companies. We have those patient organizations, we have hospitals, we have HCPs all involved. We have patient organizations sitting on our board of directors. You know, we've brought them into that governance process and really put them at the center where they're able to have their voice heard and ensure that whatever we're building is actually patient-centric. There's no better way to find that out than actually having patients at the table, rather than something that you go off to at the end of a project and kind of double check with the patients, was that okay? Oh wait, we're $5 million into a development cycle and no, it wasn't. So again, by bringing them in here early on, we feel that we have a much better approach on how to actually build patient-centric systems. Secure healthcare data sharing is something that, you know, our first product is, and I know it's an evil word, it's a blockchain product. It's a blockchain product without any cryptocurrency involved, for the record. We use blockchain as a piece of technology, same way as you would a SQL or an Oracle database. It's just another technology selection. So we get a lot of data integrity and security benefits out of the box with some of the technology choices that we make. We are an open innovation platform for solving ecosystem-led problems. We are not focused on taking over the world of pharma technology. We focus on use cases that have a need for multiple companies and multiple stakeholders to come together and collaborate on a single product, you know, a single platform. That's really where we're focused, is on those ecosystem level solutions. We believe, you know, let's hope that we'll drive increased efficiency in healthcare systems in general. And note that I'm not just saying pharmaceutical companies here, you know, I'm talking about proper healthcare systems, you know, at a national level. By disintermediating all of those data silos and bringing everybody onto the same playing field, for want of a better word, where we're all sharing data that we know why it's being collected, that it's being collected and shared in a secure and compliant manner out of the box, and is also giving value back to the people that are along that value chain. And we believe that at the end of the day, in a few years, that we would actually improve patient health and safety by looking at this detecting falsified medicines issue and potentially coming up with ecosystem-level solutions for the DFM, for DCSCA in the US, and just for how patients interact with their drugs and how they gain trust in their drugs at the core of it, you know, by having that kind of ecosystem-level approach. This is, you know, from our bylaws, essentially, you know, the purpose of the PLA, the PharmaLedger Association, is to accelerate that digital transformation and value creation piece for patients and stakeholders, common platform for collaborative innovation and trusted transactions in a healthcare DTE. What's a healthcare DTE? We've taken some, you know, let's say, MBB consulting language around this. So a DTE is a digital trust ecosystem. So this is an ecosystem where multiple actors come together in order to build and validate solutions that benefit the entire ecosystem. If somebody came along with a proposal to us that only benefited one stakeholder in that ecosystem, that's not a product for us. Somewhere else can, you can take that to somewhere else and somewhere else can build that for you. We're looking at those whole ecosystem solutions. What's our core values? We intend to connect, protect, empower, build, and sustain. At this early stage, we're focused on the connect piece, is bringing together the stakeholders. I think as of yesterday, we're up over 35 members now. I'm going to say we have 8 out of 10 of the big pharma companies. We have multiple patient organizations. We're onboarding a lot of US not-for-profits as well in the healthcare space. So we're focusing on bringing those stakeholders together. The protect piece is really about putting in place the governance framework around these products and around this collaboration, putting in place quality management systems, data privacy management systems, cybersecurity programs, all of the things that you would have to do anyway, but really with this focus of how do we build and protect these collaborative ecosystems, which is a much harder problem than building these frameworks around a single vendor-client relationship. It really becomes exponentially more difficult. Empowering is very important to us, not just from the patient perspective, but for all of the ecosystem players. We don't want any closed doors. We're an incredibly transparent organization. In fact, for our first technology product, you can go look at how we built it online right now. You don't even have to be a member. We want to empower everybody in the ecosystem to be able to see how this was built, how it was validated, and how it's operated. Very, very different model than I think many of us are used to in the pharma ecosystem. I was speaking to some of you earlier that this is a model that actually works outside of pharma. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, really. We're trying to bring the wheel to the pharma industry. We can look at examples like the MITRE Corporation in the US. So anybody who's heard of the MITRE Corporation, it's a $1.8 billion not-for-profit in the US that is mostly focused on the aviation market. So, the example I use is that if you want to design a new type of wing in the US, you go to MITRE. You bring them your designs, you say, look, we've came up with this model. We want to make sure that this is safe, compliant, something that the market is interested in. They will then help you with your validation studies, with your stress testing, with your CAD modeling, to make sure everything is lined up with the standards, with the regulatory expectations, et cetera. And then once that piece is done, you then go back to your commercial customers and say, hey, Boeing or Airbus, I have a new wing design. It's been validated here by MITRE. We're ready to go. We have all of the stamps that we need. Let's start to talk about doing a deal. The analogy we use internally is we want to start setting up a railroad, right? We want to lay the tracks for everybody. We want to set up the timetables and the schedules and the safety standards. However, we as the PharmaLedger Association, we don't want to put trains on those tracks. We want commercial players and other ecosystem players to come along and put those trains there. We give you the platform, we give you the set of standards, but really it's up to industry and, private sector to come along and actually build applications on top of that platform. The build piece, we're still early on. 3 weeks ago, we launched our first product. So I think we're probably moving faster than pharma does, but not as fast as some startups do. Our first product's called DPI. I'll come to it later in more detail, but it's essentially digitizing those gigantic patient leaflets that we all have and love and never actually read because they're totally illegible in most cases. Very simple solution, but just to prove that we are actually able to build GXP software in this manner. And sustain. This is the big piece. This is a very new way of working. The industry has some reticence around it, but we've seen that early adoption. So we are hopeful that this will be something that will be a long-term play. This isn't something, and it's again, the other nice thing about being non-commercial is we don't have to pay back investors. We're very much looking at this as a long-term play. I've already talked about a lot of this already. The PharmaLedger network from an ecosystem point of view includes regulatory agencies, healthcare providers, warehouse, 3PL providers, research and academia. We have a number of universities on board who want to do some research and do some early stage kind of R&D around a lot of these ideas. There's a lot of interesting stuff to do there, particularly for the US. Insurers and NGO payers is a big, big piece of the pie. Biopharma in general, that's the core of our early stage membership. patients. I spoke about that already. And it's really by bringing all of these stakeholders together that you actually get the value out of this not-for-profit model. This is a little bit repetitive, so I'm going to skip that one just in the interest of time. So, what are we working on? So our core objectives for this year is to go into production with EPI in Q1. Since I've actually submitted these slides, we've gone live with EPI in Q1. So, we're moving on track on that. Enhance that product and potentially look at qualifying some features around detecting falsified medicines, looking at some of the basic things like serial number verification. There's also further things we can do very easily within the existing app around, falsified medicines checks on the pack where you have hidden features included, and we were speaking to a number of the hidden feature providers who would then integrate with our platform that through a single patient app, the patient would be able to not just check their patient leaflet, they would also be able to get a serial number check and also do an anti-counterfeit check. So it's about building that value for the patient out of it as well. Don't make them go into 10 different apps to do 10 different things. Give them a single portal to be able to do it. Doesn't matter what manufacturer your medicine is from, doesn't matter what feature provider you've used for your hidden features on your pack. Give a patient an easy way to actually interact with all of these things that the pharma industry has put into the pack. At a program level, create a realistic roadmap for, how we're going to do this over the next 5 to 10 years. This is our first year of operation. We're still very early. We have that initial kind of critical mass of stakeholders on board, but how do we build and expand out this? There's no point in us doing this if it's only going to be one product. We really want to see this as, a bigger play that we're able to expand into different products and be able to bring that value and that way of working into those multiple product areas. And grow the ecosystem. And, this is one of the reasons that I'm here today is we really want people on board with this. This isn't a sales pitch. We have no commercial intent here, but really we want to have more people involved in the association. We have an incredibly structured fee model for membership fees. This is how we gain our revenue to pay my salary and others. If you're a small company under 100 employees, it's €5,000 a year. We've kept it quite small. If you want to be a patron member and come along and get a guaranteed board seat and everything else, it's $500,000 a year. But at the end of the day, if you compare that to the potential commercial cost of the software that we're providing to you, it's still quite small. But we have that kind of structure going all the way up depending on how many FTEs your company has. What do we look like as an organization? We are driven by our General Assembly. So that is the body comprised of all of our members. One member, one vote. There's no weighting here in favor of any stakeholder. So when it comes to all of the important decisions of the organization, it really is that if you're a member there, you get your vote and it's equal to everybody else. Including electing a board of directors. The board of directors is split up depending on the membership class to ensure that, for example, we have 2 guaranteed seats for patient organizations. We have 2 guaranteed seats for non-governmental organizations, and we have 5 seats for fee-paying members, which are primarily pharmaceutical companies or consulting firms. Number of different departments internally, quality, trust, and safety, which is my organization. We have a group dedicated to ecosystem management. That's really grow and kind of sustain the ecosystem. We have a technology team, obviously, including developers. And then we have these product teams that are really focused on delivering an individual product that has been chosen by the organization as a focus for us. Starting in July, we'll also have an innovation lab. So this is really early stage R&D. This is, I have an idea. I have no idea how it's going to work yet, but I have an idea. And we hope to provide a kind of a safe innovation space for people to come along, propose those ideas in a very collaborative manner. We would potentially put up some support, be it development, be it an infrastructure piece, to do some proof of concepts to really validate those ideas and see if they are viable. And then the idea is that if those ideas are proven to be viable and, something that the entire ecosystem agrees that it wants to pursue, then we would take that into the organization as a product and we would work on developing that with all of the stakeholders. On a 5-year roadmap, this is very hopeful, let's say, given that this is year 1. We've completed that EPI quality management system. We've completed the launch of that product. Then, as I said, we're looking at the detecting falsified medicines piece. We're also looking at potentially building a product on finished goods traceability. That's something we're hoping to start this summer. Again, for finished goods traceability, really that end-to-end supply chain view, you can see why coming together and collaborating in a not-for-profit structure would be more conducive to actually success in that area than maybe a more commercial model. And then as we look out into the future, taking some of the use cases that we had in the research phase, back in the EU-funded phase, we have a lot of proof of concepts already built around clinical trial management, e-consent, around personalized medicines, on-person device data collection. There's a lot more that we can draw on there from that EU research that we'd completed. We're too small, being frank, to take them all on at once. We have 8 use cases there that were actually built during the research phase. We've taken 2 into production first. If somebody came along and gave us $20 million tomorrow, I'm sure we could take them all, but really it's about that stepwise approach and being realistic in what we can provide. And the benefits, it's really what's in it for me. Why should companies or, organizations join the association? The first and biggest thing is, this is something we kind of learned as we went along, is the accelerating digital innovation piece. I think a lot of pharmaceutical companies in particular struggle with digital transformation, and we found that working on PharmaLedger projects is a very easy way for them to start in this area. The reason being is we make it easy. Our governance processes, our quality management processes are extremely flexible. If you're a very traditional organization and you're not able to accept vendor testing and you need to redo everything internally, that's fine, we can accommodate that. If you're a small to medium-sized enterprise and you want to accept absolutely all of the qualification testing that the PLA has done and you want to just do your validation on top of that, we can also accommodate that. By being very agile and flexible, we find that we're able to help companies at the speed that they're able to operate at, essentially. Add your voice and expertise to this ecosystem development piece. Certainly, being frank, I left a very secure and stable job at Novartis to take up a role with a not-for-profit that has a rocky future ahead of it potentially. If this works, it's transformative, and transformative in a really real way. And being on the ground on day 0 of that type of initiative, it's a risk. It's something that you would need to invest time and effort into, but the potential payoff in 3 or 4 or 5 years, if this is successful, is huge. It's just a fact. For smaller companies in particular, the benefit of collaborating with large organizations. So I'm going to be frank, we have a number of small companies who have joined purely because they're at the same meetings as Novartis, GSK, Takeda, MSD. You're working on things together. From a brand recognition and just ability to understand how they work, it's huge for a lot of smaller companies. It's an immediate in without having to go through, 6 years of pilots and proof of concepts to get to the stage where you might get to work for a big pharma company. You're here and you're working together with them on a day-to-day basis. It's that level of collaboration straight out of the gate. I'm going to skip 1 or 2 of these and go to really the decisions on the prioritization of the future. So we're still a pretty small organization. I said we have about 30 members at the moment. So what direction we go on that strategic roadmap, what areas we focus on, and what big picture challenges do we want to approach, that's something that anybody who's joining now in year 1 is really able to influence. Anybody who's gone through startup life or anything like that knows that your first year or 2 are really when you set out your strategic priorities for your first 5 or 7 years. By coming in now, you get your voice on the table and say, hey, I want us to focus on this. You're able to make the case for that. So really being able to set that early strategic direction is another really big benefit to being able to come in this early. So coming back to, what's a product and, what's an R&D piece. So on the left, we have this piece about core projects. So these are projects that have reached a sufficient level of maturity from an innovation point of view to say, this is something we can launch as a product. In the commercial world, we would say launch it as a commercial product. This has gone through our clinical phase and, we're ready to actually launch this now. So that's where it comes under the control of the PharmaLedger QMS, we start putting really those regulatory guidelines around it, and we start really working towards a qualification and a release of a product to the member companies for them to implement under a GMP atmosphere. On the right, we have these sponsored projects. This is something we've actually taken from academic research and development labs, where we understand that outside of our core focus areas as an association, there may be other interesting ideas that, being frank, organizations with cash flow want us to focus on. We will also have this concept under the R&D lab of sponsored projects. So if you have a particular technology challenge that you want to be solved and you want it to be solved quickly and you're willing to put money on the table to do that, we will also then have a specific, fast track path for these sponsored projects where you say, I'll put almost like a bounty of, let's say, 200,000 euros on the table for anybody who's able to solve this technology challenge for us. And we would run all of the governance and the process around that for those sponsored projects. This is often used in preclinical research in the US in particular. And we took a lot of these ideas from the MIT X Lab, which is, really focused on those kind of early stage challenges that once they're solved, they have a multiplier effect on, the follow-on impact of them. How do you get from one to the other? How do you get from these kind of R&D projects to a really core product? It's TRLs. So anybody who's worked with the EU or with any US federal authorities, you have these technology readiness levels. So you start right at the top of, basic principles. What are we trying to solve here? Do we have an idea written down of what the challenge is? Then you come along to, architecture and technology, right? Well, what pieces of technology could we put in place to really formulate a response to this challenge? Then you go into an experimental proof of concept. This is often kind of a hybrid system. Some of it's still on paper, some of it's actually with the tech. Then you really go into that kind of TRL4 of a technology validated in a lab. This is really where we expect the PharmaLedger X Lab to come along and say, right, we give you the framework to prove that technology validation. Can it scale? Is it the right architecture? We'll bring experts along to be able to have that kind of conversation of, gut checking versus, let's look at some real world challenges, real world scale, is this something that needs to be able to do 10 transactions per second, or does it need to be able to do 10 million transactions per second? And having that industry expertise being able to guide these projects along that. Then as you go up the chain, you get out of the lab at TRL 6 and into a product. So that will be what we would call a graduation process, whereby there would have to be a business case around it. The technology would have to be sufficiently mature from a development point of view to really say, yes, this is something that is, number one, validatable as per GXP requirements. We need to make sure it's capable of delivering data integrity. It's a secure and compliant system. And then you go up, from there, essentially, we would qualify it internally at the PLA, and then we would release it to the member companies for them to install and validate it. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of potential use cases. We have proof of concepts for almost all of these, apart from the personalized medicines. We have something already built. Right from clinical trial recruitment, again, you can see that as a very multi-party ecosystem level challenge. It's certainly not something that I'm aware of any big pharma doing entirely on their own. There's always a CRO involved. There's always hospitals involved. It's always a multi-party challenge. Coming right through then, clinical supply, how do you actually get to that level of, itemized container level visibility on your clinical supply? Electronic product information, we've already launched that. Finished goods traceability is our next kind of big challenge that we're coming up on this summer. Adding that detect and falsified medicines capability to the EPI product is our plan. And then medical device, IoT, personalized medicine, I will be honest and say that's probably 3-5 years out. Again, there was some early stage research done on that over the last few years in the project phase, but it's not something I think we'll focus on ourselves. But again, if a company wanted to come along with a sponsored project, for example, we could definitely take up that work again. The big question that everybody says when I say blockchain is why? And really here, it's nothing to do with anything other than the fact that it's a way to have a database that no single party needs to manage. That's really the simplest explanation of what the blockchain is doing here. We use it as a resolver. So anybody who's from a supply chain background, we actually use the 2D data matrix that's already on the pack of medicine. Embedded in that, in almost all cases, is a GTIN and a serial number. A GTIN is a global trade identification number. Essentially, it points you to the right MAH holder for that drug. And then the serial number identifies, okay, what batch did it come from, specifics. We use the blockchain as a resolver when a patient scans through a single app, by the way. Doesn't matter whether the drugs are coming from Takeda, MSD, Novartis, they use a single application for this. We use the blockchain as a resolver to say, okay, for this GTIN and serial number combination, go to this API at this manufacturer, right? So if I scan I used to work for Novartis, so I'll use them because it's probably safer. If I scan a Novartis pack, the blockchain will go, okay, for the hash of that GTIN and serial number, go to this API. That API will be at the right Novartis MAH holder. It will then, either from an internal database or from a back-end system, if they wish, such as SAP, pull the correct current leaflet for that drug. The current piece is very important because anybody who's seen product recalls due to incorrect patient leaflets or due to API or excipient changes knows that it's incredibly expensive to recall a drug just because a piece of paper is wrong. With this, you can update that in real time so that the next time a patient scans that, they're getting the correct information. They can also be informed through the app at the same time that the drug is subject to a recall. The drug is subject to a product change. The drug needs to be consulted with your pharmacy or your physician. There's a lot of patient communication that we can start looking at doing in the future when you have that kind of one-to-one relationship between the exact serial number of the drug that the patient is taking. We can verify that by the fact that they're scanning that pack, and we can even do an anti-counterfeit check on that pack to make sure that we're really, really right. So, you start getting a lot more patient-centric in how you can interact with your patients at that point. And then that leaflet is then sent back to the patient, displayed to them in their app in a easily usable, readable, searchable interface. I think, and this is just my personal opinion, probably 80 or 90% of use of leaflets is a side effect. I have a headache. All right, let me go get this thing and try and find headaches. No, just search headaches. It's about making it very easy and patient-centric. What do they actually want to use from this? It's a very cool looking app. It's very simple to use. I won't go into too much detail on this. We're launching in Singapore, Belgium, and Canada, by the way. We will come to the UK at some point in the future, I'm sure, pending, discussions with the MHRA and regulatory agencies. But, this is not complex. It's a very simple use case. And again, why is because of that patient focus piece. I've worked on patient applications in my big pharma days before. They were not particularly patient-focused. They were built by pharma because we had a need to interact with our patient. With this, we flipped it around. We had patients at, day zero design phase here when it was still an idea, before we built a UI, before we'd built an application. Ask a patient, what do you actually want to see from this? Flip the paradigm on its head, bring them in early, which is very difficult when you're a big pharma company. It's not very difficult when you're a not-for-profit foundation. We have a lot more opportunities to directly interact with regulators, with patients, with hospitals. We have a lot more flexibility around that. I'm not going to dwell on this for now, but in the slides when they go out, you'll actually be able to do, this is a non-GMP demo system, but just to prove that it works. This is real world. This is not a proof of concept or a pilot. This, when you do it at home, is scanning from a real world multi-party blockchain run by pharmaceutical companies. We don't run any nodes as the PLA. We're not involved in the implementation of this. We just bring everybody together, qualify the software, and bring it back out to them to use. Sorry, I'm short on time, so I'm going to skip to the end. The next thing is, if anybody wants to talk about this in future, please do feel free to reach out to me. You can get me at james@pharmaledger.org. Go to the website, learn more. We're a very open organization, and we really want to be challenged in these early days. We want people to come along and poke holes in our business model, poke holes in, what are we missing? Is there elements here that we're not seeing yet? And we really want that to be a collaborative way of moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Most interesting. We have time for exactly one question. Who wants to?
I've shocked everybody. I'm double booked, so I'm happy to run.
Okay. Thank you very much. And,
Brilliant. Thanks, folks.
Very good.